Hi guys, today we're going to review units 5 and 6. We're going to cover our time period that goes from 1750 to 1900. Unit 5 was the revolutions unit, and unit 6 was the consequences to industrialization unit, otherwise known as imperialism. Alrighty, so big picture, our main themes that we're going to cover is because of the events from the last time period, remember Columbus sailed the ocean blue and discovered that there's like a whole two other continents over there, and that gets the Europeans very interested. Because of that, we're going to have a truly global trade network established, and this is going to lead to the spread of technology, ideas, people, disease, and cultures. We're also going to see new ideas from the Enlightenment come to light, because Enlightenment, never mind. And this is going to cause a lot of political revolutions and also intellectual revolutions. New technology and innovations from the Industrial Revolution are going to also affect a lot of things. We're going to see states react differently to industrialization. Some of them might react positively, some of them might react negatively. And this is going to cause much more industrialized states to establish more colonies during this time period, otherwise known as imperialism. We're going to also see resistance to imperialism and colonization, and this is going to set the stage for our decolonization in the next time period. Lastly, we're going to see some migrations happening. Either they're going to be forced, where the people don't have a choice but to go somewhere, or they're going to be voluntary, where people choose to move somewhere else. First, let's start off with looking at Unit 5, and we are starting with our political revolutions. All of these are going to happen because of the Enlightenment. So, the Enlightenment is just an intellectual movement that's going to use reason to reconsider accepted ideas. Some of the ideas that are gonna spawn from the Enlightenment are things such as individual rights, especially for people who don't have rights, like Black people and other people of color and women and colonized peoples and poor people. We're also going to see natural rights become a thing where people are like, if I'm born in a certain country, then I have certain rights, like a right to vote and a right to live and a freedom of speech. Also, we're going to see the idea of the social contract emerge, where it's basically like an agreement between individuals and their government. We're also going to see lots of movements towards nationalism and revolutions spawn out of the Enlightenment ideas. So I'm just going to list them. I'm not going to go through every one of them specifically, and the ones in bold are ones that are mostly mentioned on the AP exam. So I would prioritize those when I'm studying. So we've got the American Revolution in 1776, the French Revolution in 1789, the Haitian Revolution in 1791, Latin American independence movements in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. We've got the New Zealand Wars in 1845, the Philippines propaganda movement starting in 1880, Italian unification in 1870, and German unification in 1871. So you don't need to know the specifics of each of these, but I would think about the importance that each of these had, the causes and the consequences when I'm looking at all of these movements. As you can see, because of our revolutions, we've got, let's take Latin America, for example. Before in 1800, you can see green equals Spanish colonies, yellow equals Portuguese colonies, and then 30 years later, they're all independent, basically, except for these tiny parts. But anyway, mostly all independent, and this is all because they got ideas from the Enlightenment movement. Alrighty, now that we've talked about our political revolutions, let's move on to the main revolution of this unit, the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution takes up the bulk of our Unit 5, so it's super important. Basically, with the Industrial Revolution, we went from making things with our hands to making things with machines. And it's going to start in England, but quickly spread first to the rest of Europe, then to the US, then Russia, then Japan, then to like the rest of the world. So making stuff with machines is actually very fast, it's very cheap, and it's much more efficient. The government is going to play a role in industrialization. They're either going to be very hands-on and control everything, or very hands-off and kind of like not control all of this industrialization. We're also going to see different reactions to industrialization, positive and negative from different countries. Because of the industrialization, we're going to see an increase in trade and the migration of people. And we're also going to see a shift from mercantilism, that was our economic ideology from last time period, to capitalism. That's our economic ideology of this time period. With the rise of capitalism, we're going to see multinational corporations come about, and they just are corporations that have that transcend borders, that are across multiple borders. So their headquarters might be in England, but maybe they might have factories in India, multinational corporations. We're also going to see the rise of consumerism, and this gives birth to the advertisement industry, where we want to convince people to buy, so we can sell, so we can make all that money. Because of all of this, we are going to see some criticism and new movements pop up because of industrialization. Industrialization tends to leave people with poor working conditions, horrible pay, lots of bad stuff happens in society, and this is going to garner criticism, most notably from our two main guys, Marx and Engels, who are going to come up with communism. We're also going to see industrialized countries dominate the world, and this leads directly to imperialism in our Unit 6. So let's answer this question: how did different countries respond to industrialization? We're going to look at 4 examples, and I advise you to make a handy-dandy chart when looking at this just to better organize your information. We're going to look at the US, Russia, Japan, and the Ottoman Empire. First, let's look at the United States. So in the United States, the government took a hands-on approach to industrialization, where they actually sponsored lots of these big projects. One example is the Transcontinental Railroad, and that's the picture right here. But they also had a hands-off approach in that a lot of times they let corporations do whatever they wanted, and corporations took advantage of that by not paying their workers and by creating monopolies. The US had a very positive reaction to industrialization. They embraced it pretty quickly, and one of the reasons they were able to do this is because they had lots of cheap labor from all of those immigrants coming into the United States, and they were able to do all of the unskilled, very menial tasks, very easy factory work. In Russia, the government took control of industrialization, but that's mostly because the government controlled a lot of stuff. So industrialization happened, but it happened very slowly. First, because Russia had a huge amount of territory, but also because it took a lot of time for things to get through the Russian bureaucracy. There was a lot of corruption, and also it was an autocracy. That means the Tsar controlled everything. So it took some time, but they did manage to industrialize to some extent. They built the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which was designed to go from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok in the Pacific Ocean. It wasn't quite finished in time, and I think the communists take over before it's actually fully finished. Most of the country was still peasant farmers by the end of our time period that we're going to focus on, so their reaction to industrialization was like, meh. It wasn't negative because they wanted to industrialize, but it wasn't positive because they weren't like super excited. Over in Japan, we see that the government took a very hands-on approach, and it was a very successful industrialization. So Japan industrialized in what we call the Meiji Restoration. Remember, this is when the emperor is going to be restored to power. He's not just a symbolic figure. And then because of this, Japan is going to build railroads. They're going to establish a constitutional monarchy, so that's modeled after European governments. And they had a very positive reaction to industrialization because they saw what happened to countries like China that did not industrialize, and they were basically gobbled up by the Western powers. So in order to preserve their Japanese culture, they industrialized on their own terms, so they would not appear weak in the face of Western powers like China did. Over in the Ottoman Empire, we had a hands-on approach to industrialization, and that's just because of Muhammad Ali, and this only happened in Egypt. So Muhammad Ali was the governor of Egypt, and he built lots of textile factories. He's using that Egyptian cotton. But the empire as a whole, the Ottoman Empire as a whole, did not really industrialize, and this made them very weak, very vulnerable in the face of our industrialized Western powers. Moving on to Unit 6, our main question that we want to ask is what happened as a result of industrialization? I'll give you a hint. Imperialism. Remember that building up of empires? We had empires before, but this new wave of imperialism is going to result in a new global order, shift in the balance of power. So we are going to see our Europeans still dominate the globe, still have different colonies everywhere. But notice that Portugal and Spain are not at the top. Their power diminished a lot once they lost their colonies in Latin America. And we're also going to have new players come into the game, the United States and Japan. They're going to start putting their own colonies all over the globe and taking over territories. So one of the main questions that we have to ask ourselves is what is going to cause this new wave of imperialism in the 19th century? The Industrial Revolution is basically the main cause because we were able to make more stuff faster and more cheaply. We are going to need some raw materials to feed our factories. Raw materials are stuff like cotton, rubber, palm oil, diamonds. And with those raw materials, we're going to take them and we're going to make manufactured goods like clothes and tires and jewelry. And then we're going to take those manufactured goods and sell them to markets, to places where we can sell them. So we need new markets. This is going to be the main drive of imperialism in the 19th century. But we are also going to have other motivations. So we're going to have economic motivations, and that can be seen with our need for raw materials and new markets. But also we are going to we're going to keep planting cash crops. Those are crops grown strictly for profit. We're going to see cultural motivations as well, like the need to spread civilization, the need to spread Christianity, and also different ideas like social Darwinism and racism that are basically going to justify Europeans going out there and saying that they're better than people of color and other colonized peoples. Also, we have a political motivation, spreading nationalism and also showing how great of a country you are by showing off how many different colonies you have. Let's look at how imperialism affected different parts of the world, and we're going to go over this really quickly. And we're going to go over 4 different parts of the world. We're going to look at Africa, Asia, and the Americas, and I would advise making a handy-dandy chart as well to organize your information. First, let's look at how imperialism played out in Africa. So we're going to have to scramble for Africa, and this is European powers scrambling to get pieces of Africa for themselves. Because of this, we're going to have our old friend Otto von Bismarck organize the Berlin Conference, where he's like, guys, instead of us fighting for Africa, let's just divide it amongst ourselves. Of course, we're not inviting any of the Africans to have a say in this, so this is going to cause lots of problems later on. In Africa, we are going to see the British gain control over Egypt because they want to gain control of that Suez Canal. The French are going to establish colonies in West Africa. The Belgians, more specifically the Belgian King Leopold, is going to establish his own personal colony in the Congo, which is in Central Africa. We're going to see some resistance to imperialism in Africa. We can see this with the Xhosa cattle killing movement, where we have the Xhosa people in South Africa kill their cattle to resist British imperialism. Over in Asia, we're going to see the British East India Company take over the whole Indian subcontinent, and they're going to employ these soldiers called sepoys to go ahead and conquer India. The Europeans are also going to set their eyes on China. They want to trade with them because China has lots of goods and markets and raw materials that they want to trade. This leads to the establishment of spheres of influence. This can be seen in this political cartoon right here, where we have the European powers carving up China for themselves. So they don't necessarily have colonies there, but they do have spheres where they basically have control over what happens in that specific part of China. Japan is also going to start to imperialize. One of their first colonies that they get is Korea. Resistance to imperialism in Asia, specifically in China, can be seen in the Opium Wars. Remember, where we were going to have the Chinese government resist the British coming in and trying to get their whole population addicted to opium. This results in the Opium Wars. China loses, but it does show that they put up resistance to imperialism. in the Americas, we are going to see the U.S. Subjugate all of the Native American population in North America. We are going to see the U.S. also employ something called economic imperialism, where one country has economic influence over another country. They basically control them economically, so not politically, but economically. The U.S. is going to use this when they basically have their companies, like the United Fruit Company, establish little banana republics in Central America, where they basically control the government and the economy of Central American countries. The U.S. is also going to go to war with Spain in the Americas. That's the Spanish-American War, and they're going to gain a few territories as a result of that. They're also going to build a canal in Panama in order to shorten shipping times. We are going to see resistance to imperialism in the Americas with the Native American ghost dance. This was a way that Native Americans were resisting the Americans coming in and taking all of their territory. We are also going to see this with Tupac Amaru in Peru, where he is going to try to lead a rebellion against the Spanish. Doesn't work. He gets captured and executed and tortured, not in that order. Last place we're going to look at is the Pacific, and we are going to see the U.S. gain control of the Philippines. That's after that Spanish-American War. First, the Spanish controlled the Philippines, then it was the U.S. Japan and the Dutch are going to get little islands in Southeast Asia. The British are going to establish new colonies in Australia, which is their penal colony, and then New Zealand, their settler colony. Resistance to imperialism here can be seen in the New Zealand Wars, where the Maori people, the indigenous people of New Zealand, resist British imperialism. And then we also see movements of nationalism in the Philippines, where the Philippine people unite first against the Spanish and then against the Americans when they took over control of the Philippines. Last thing that we look at in Unit 6 is migrations, because we had people moving all over the world for different reasons. So some of the causes of migration might be that people are attracted to new opportunities all over the world, like the discovery of gold in the west of the United States and in Australia. We also see people flee war and political instability that happened in Europe, and that's going to cause lots of Italian immigrants to come to South America and the United States, and lots of European immigrants to come to the United States. And then we also, you remember, we have the slave trade. The cause of this was, you know what, it was in the last in the last time period. That is an example of a coerced migration of people because they were forced to move from Africa to the United States. Effects of migrations are going to be that we're going to see different cultures kind of blend together and be incorporated into other cultures. So an example of this can be when the Irish went to the United States. We now celebrate St. Patrick's Day. That's an Irish holiday. We have lots of Chinatowns all over the United States and Australia. And then we also have lots of Italian culture being incorporated in Argentine culture. So those are just some examples.